Okay folks, welcome back to Lesson 8 in Psychology. This week's lesson is going to be called Individual Interaction, and it's going to start a two-lesson unit really looking at the group dynamics and social interaction between people. So we're going to start off with one-on-one, and then we'll go to group interaction during Lesson 9. And really what we're looking at here is how do we choose who we interact with, how do we make judgments about who we like and who we don't like from cues that are given to us by those people, and a little bit about the dynamic of love as well. How do we choose the people that we love and what's going on with that? So that's what we're talking about this week. So if we're going to talk about social interaction, let's take a look for this spotlight at what happens when people have trouble with social interaction. And those folks have some level of anxiety. We've talked about anxiety before in this class, but social anxiety is really a disorder. It's called SAD, social anxiety disorder, and it is one that's characterized by intense fear in social situations. Now, we can all be nervous in certain social situations, when we go to a party and we don't know everybody, or maybe when we're on a first date, or maybe if we know we have to do some sort of a presentation or a speech. All those make us nervous. When somebody has a social anxiety disorder, it's well beyond. This is intense fear. This is, you're absolutely petrified to the point where just going to a place where there are people that you might have to interact with scares you so much that you choose not to do it. And it's really based on some chronic fears. The fear of being judged by others because of what you say or what you do or how you look. And it's also by you embarrassing yourself. Well, I'm going to do something that looks dumb, or I'm going to say something stupid, and so I'm just in catastrophic fear that those kind of things would happen. Usually, and this is not particularly surprising, I don't think, for most people, social anxiety disorder has its onset usually by the teen years, somewhere between about the preteen, 11 or so, to 18 is when this particular disorder has its onset and is at its worst. And that's during a time of a lot of changes for people and a lot of social issues anyway, so this is kind of, it certainly doesn't help. It's a bit of piling on. It can lead to depression, clinical depression or otherwise, and it can lead to some pretty ugly self-destructive disorders like alcoholism or eating disorders like bulimia or anorexia. Treatment for social anxiety disorder includes behavior modification therapy. Okay, if you remember that from the last lesson, we talked about what kind of therapies do we have, and behavior modification is one, and sometimes also prescription medication can help with social anxiety disorder. Alright, so what is social psychology? Social psychology is the study of how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by others. So let's think about what that means. What are we doing, what's going on inside of our head that are influenced by our interaction with other people? And social cognition is the study, remember cognition means thinking, the study of how we perceive, store, and retrieve information about social interactions. So how do we categorize, how do we, if you will, kind of file the way that we interact with people based on what they do and who they are? That would be social cognition. And one of the most important things when dealing with individual interaction is talking about the idea of friendships. We are social beings. There's no question that human beings are a social animal. There are animals that are solitary, and there are animals that are social, and we are certainly one that is social. Everybody has a different level of enjoying interaction with others, but all of us need some level of respect, love, praise, and interaction with other people. We especially need some sort of companionship or friendship when we're anxious. If we're nervous about something, we're worried about something, to talk it out, to have somebody else to go through it with, makes us feel much better. And we need that human touch, that human connection at that point. We also like to compare experiences with others. So it makes us feel good that somebody has had a similar experience to us. And we can talk about, well, what did you do in this experience and how did you work through it? Or I'm about to do it and you've done it before, so what does it feel like? What is it, all those kind of things. That's really important for us to kind of compare notes in terms of how we interact. And we also need social supports when times are difficult. We need to have somebody's shoulder that we can kind of cry on, if you want to think of it that way. Choosing friends. How do we choose friends? Well, this is really pretty fascinating. It seems like a fairly simple concept, and one that's hard to even, we would spend time thinking about it. But there are real ways that we can chronicle how we choose our friends. The first is by proximity. The people that are close to us, either physically or because of work or somehow connected with our lives, tend to be those that we have most friendships with, which is why your best friends tend to be the ones that you go to school with or that you're in sports with and things like that. Someone, if you live in the northwest part of Las Vegas, your chances are probably minor that you're going to just randomly have a tight friendship with somebody who lives in the far part of Egypt. You don't have much in common with that person. You're going to probably not be connected with those folks unless there's some commonalities between you. But generally it's the closeness, the proximity of another person allows that friendship to occur. Another one is what's called reward values, and that's the benefits of having a friend. So if you have a friend who builds you up, makes you feel good, says good things about you, all that kind of stuff, you tend to be more willing to make them your friend. Also, physical appearance. This is interesting. We think that, beauty is only skin deep, and that's true, but every study that has been done on friendship and how we choose friends and the interaction we have with people suggests that physical appearance does count. And so the more, and I'm kind of saying this in quotes, attractive, because attractive is something that differs from different people in different cultures, but the more attractive a person is, the more they tend to be somebody that you want to be friends with. So that's a fact that we found too. Approval, like I said before, a person that makes us feel better about ourselves. Similarity, do they have the same background, the same beliefs? If somebody has completely different beliefs, doesn't believe in anything that you value in your life, it's hard for them to be a friend oftentimes. And something called complementarity, and that means the opposites. So if you're shy, are they outgoing? If you like to spend money, do they like to save money? Those sometimes attract, but not as much as similarity. Similarity is a much more common way to choose friends than in the opposites attracting concept. All right, and how do we perceive others? This is a really interesting thing. When we see a new person, we make almost instant judgments of them. And I've got the picture of the guy over here on the right-hand side. Looks like a kind of a used car salesman. Got the cigar hanging out. Got the comb over going on. Looks a little sketchy. This is not somebody probably that you would look at and say, you'd worry that he's going to try to be selling you something. And so we've made that instant snap judgment about this guy. And so that's called the primacy effect. The primacy effect is that we form opinion based on first impressions. First impressions can be visual. What do they look like? How do they carry themselves? What kind of clothes are they wearing? It can be the first interactions. What do they say? What's their attitude? Do they smile a lot? All those things. Those first impressions are very powerful. And while we can overcome them if we have a bad first impression, it's really actually pretty hard, because we are only going to give somebody another chance if they pass that first test. Schemas are, and we've talked about this word schemas before, schemas are categories. And so when it comes to social perception and friendship, it's placing people in categories based on those impressions. This guy is friendly. This woman is outgoing. This person is angry. We're putting people in categories based on what we're seeing. And so that's how we have those first impressions. That's why it's hard for us to overcome, because we've already filed them away in our mind as having those particular categories. A stereotype, so a schema is how we're kind of categorizing individuals based on what we've seen. A stereotype is when we make assumptions about entire groups of people based on maybe something we've seen or what we've heard. So all people from Canada are like this, or all women are like this. And when you make those kind of generalizations, stereotypes, obviously you're fraught with error, because you can't make those kind of assumptions about large groups of people. Sometimes those can be very negative, unfortunately, and we can carry those from generation to generation. So stereotypes we try to avoid. They're generally fairly negative, but it is certainly something that we deal with in our world. In terms of communication, we've talked about nonverbal communication. This is a huge way that people can get information about who you are. And when we're making those first impressions, part of it is based on the nonverbal cues that we see. So just to remind, nonverbal communication is the process by which a message is conveyed or relayed using space, body language, and facial expressions. So all those things, obviously nothing has been said, but a lot can be interpreted based on those kind of things. We read a huge amount. Some people say communication is 70% nonverbal or some huge amount like that. And so the way that you carry yourself too, which is your body language, can be huge. So if you are a person who is very confident in yourself and feels good about things, but you kind of carry yourself slunched over or hunched over and kind of closed, people might make a determination that you're not a confident person when you are. So the body language can be almost as important as what you say. Let's talk a little bit about relationships between parents and children, because those are certainly important as we move into our concept of love. And they're some of the most important individual interactions we make. We talked about friends and the importance of friends, but really that the first most critical bond that a person makes is with their parents. Parents are essentially the very first role model for children. They are the ones that help children understand how we connect with others, what the norms are, and what I mean by that is what are the rules of behavior? How do we interact with other people? How do we behave? How do we stand? How do we allow someone else to speak before we speak? How do we smile? How do we shake our hands? All those kind of interactions. People generally haven't gone through a class to learn that. You've done that by watching. You've observed experts being your parents, and you've learned how to interact based on what you've seen. Children also, from the parent-child relationship, learn how to use other people to meet their needs. And use, I don't mean in the negative sense that I'm using somebody, I'm manipulating somebody. More just, how do I interact with another human being to get what I want? If I cry, I get some food or I get held. That might be, the baby is not able to articulate that that's why they're doing it, but they certainly have learned that. They've learned that if I can make this huge loud noise, I can get what I want. If I throw a tantrum, I'm going to get maybe what I want. Those kind of things. And so we're learning as we go as a child on how we can have other people help us with the things that we need in life. Parents also provide children with a template for how to interact with other adults. And so when we watch, dad interacting with mom or dad interacting with aunt or uncle or whatever it may be, we are seeing how do adults interact with other adults. And those learned behaviors are often carried through to adulthood by the individual child. So there's a lot going on that's happening to develop good, solid, hopefully, individual interactions. Unfortunately, it can also be negative if the parent is dysfunctional, and those too can carry through to adulthood. Now, shockingly, occasionally parents and children can come into conflict, and we've certainly talked about this when we looked way back in semester 1 at adolescence. That's when we tend to see the most common parent-child conflicts. That's when they have to be most intense. And generally what we found is that children are going to be, especially during adolescence, they're trying to figure their world out. They're redefining their world, and they're trying to find some independence. And so that leads to conflict with parents. It mostly leads to conflict with parents when parents are confident parents. And while it leads to that conflict, it's critical. Children need to have confident parents, not friends. That when they're the most important adults in their life need to be able to set rules, set expectations, set boundaries for a child so that they can be effective and grow, but that they understand that somebody's in charge. And so that leads to this conflict. And conflict generally arises over the differences in generational identity. So if you think about it, each generation has their own set of what's expected and what's not expected, what's okay and what's not okay. And oftentimes those are very different. That's why when you have conversations with your grandparents about things that they did, it's going to seem very different than what your world is like. And what's a norm in modern adolescence world is certainly not going to be something that your parents, your grandparents, or your great-grandparents dealt with. So that leads to this conflict that has to be resolved. Love relationships. Here's my favorite picture. There's no question that this demonstrates true love. We've got Lady and the Tramp there with the classic spaghetti scene. And love is in addition to the parent-child interaction, I mean, the love relationships that we have with people are pretty intense, pretty important. And we love people differently depending on the relationship. We have love that's the love between a mom and a dad, or a mom and a child, a parent and a child. We have love between people that are married. We have love between friends that just love each other for their friendship. All those kind of things are love, and it depends on the relationship that you have in terms of what the kind of love you have. And there's a couple different types. There's passionate love, which would be all-consuming, intense. This tends to be that would lead to a relationship between people, and it's so important to you that you would almost give up anything else in order to have this relationship work. There's compassionate love, or companionate love, and that's more of a friendship, a trust, a wanting to spend time with people. That might be between two very, very good friends. It could mean to a couple that's been together or married for a long period of time. Those are really important, that the relationship is based on trust and friendship. A psychologist by the name of Sternberg came up with a theory of love called the triangle theory of love, in which he said that love is really made of three parts. And so let's take a look at what he had to say. If you think about this triangle that's in the middle in this purple, that you have three sides. You have intimacy, you have passion, and you have commitment. And if you have all three of those things, if you have in your relationship with your partner, your spouse, whomever it may be, if you have intimacy, passion, and commitment, then you have what's called consummate love, and that's kind of a perfect love. You have everything. Passion means the excitement, the infatuation, that part where you can think about almost nothing else. Intimacy means you're connected with that person. It doesn't have to be physically. It's probably physically and also socially, emotionally. You're letting that person into your world. And commitment means you're willing to give up other people for this person, that they are the most important person and you are going to stick with them through thick and thin. If you have all three of those things, so says this particular theory, you've got a pretty good situation, and you are, that's a marriage or a relationship that will probably work long term. If you have one of the three legs of the triangle, then or two, then you're not going to have as many so much, and so it may be overloaded where you have a commitment to this person, but there's not a lot of fire there. There's not a lot of passion. Or you have a very passionate relationship, but you don't really have a connection with the person. And so what you're trying for is that middle piece, which is that consummate love. If you can get that, you've got a pretty good thing in life. If you don't get that, then unfortunately what it leads to is something that many people in this society especially are very familiar with, and that's divorce. Divorce is when obviously a relationship has come to its conclusion, and two spouses have to dissolve their union, and unfortunately there can be an awful lot of collateral damage to that. We're approaching in our society somewhere around 50% of marriages that will end in a divorce. So it's almost a flip of the coin at this point as to whether or not a divorce will happen at some point in a person's life. And some people have multiple divorces. And divorces have even gotten to a point in our society where there's not a stigma against it. It used to be, many generations ago, that divorce was unheard of, that you couldn't have a divorce. As a matter of fact, the King of England back in the early part of the 1900s and the 1930s had to leave the throne because he was interested in a divorced woman. He was thinking about starting a relationship with a woman who had gone through a divorce, and that was so out of the norm that he had to abdicate the throne. Well, it's very different now. We recognize that divorce is a pretty common part of American life, and it's when one of these factors occur, that there can be some external factors. People are different, or they have situations where they no longer are compatible. They can be growing apart. for a number of different reasons, and sometimes this can happen, especially at what's called empty nest syndrome. Divorces, there's a huge number of divorces that happen right after children leave the home. So let's say you are a family that's fairly functional and things are okay, and the children leave to go off to college or leave to go to work or whatever, and now it's just the parents are together, and we don't have the same dynamic. We have to reshift, and maybe we find that we have grown apart during that time. So there can be a number of divorces because of that. And of course, infidelity, and that is if you've that commitment piece, the committing to a monogamous single-person relationship ends, and you no longer are able to just have one relationship. Oftentimes that can break up a marriage, infidelity, or cheating, if you want to think of it that way. Divorced people go through a period of mourning, much like there's been a death. They are having to restructure their lives without a person in it. And it can take a long time for some people, and other people can bounce back, but there certainly is a period of time where they're restructuring their lives and who they are. And divorce, of course, is very difficult on children. Young children can't understand why mommy and daddy don't care about each other anymore, why they don't live together anymore. It's very complex. As they get older, there can be some anger and backlash because of it, and so families have a hard time oftentimes adjusting to a divorce. But it is certainly part of modern life. So that's a little information about individual interactions, how we have relationships with other human beings and why those are important. So go ahead and complete this lesson. Next time I talk to you, it's going to be about groups. How do we interact in groups? And really kind of the connection between psychology and the social science of sociology. So until then, have a wonderful lesson, and we'll talk to you soon.